Okay, so this is a video about feminism. It's certainly a subject that I've covered many times. But the difference with this video is that I'm trying to amalgamate as many issues as possible into one video. The simple reason being that there might come a point when I decide to edit down some of my videos. I have a very large number of videos out there, and I'm aware that I might be covering some of the same things over again. So at some point I may edit down some of my videos simply for that reason, to make it a bit more manageable. So I want to amalgamate some of the issues that I've brought about before into one video. This video is about my stance on feminism. I may go into a part 2, but if I do that, like I say, at some point I'll edit down the other videos. I'm also partly making this just to make my position absolutely crystal clear, in case my previous videos were misunderstood, although I certainly don't lose sleep over that, but just for those reasons. Okay, so before I begin to go through the reasons why I take issue with feminism and why I don't identify myself as a feminist, I want to make some, if you like, disclaimers. Excuse me, my throat is still playing up. Maybe making all these videos, but anyway, the disclaimers I want to make clear at the very start of this. Number one, I do not believe that every single feminist is a ranting man-hater. I don't believe that. I have come across feminists who are reasonable, who certainly don't hate men, and who, whilst I would disagree with a lot of the positions they have, made their arguments in a reasonable enough way. So I don't believe the stereotype that some anti-feminists make, that all feminists are man-haters. And that brings me to my second point. I don't identify myself as an anti-feminist, because I am not against every single specific women's rights movement. Therefore, I'm not against every single, if you like, format of feminism around the world. I believe there are parts of the world where feminism is needed, or some sort of specific women's movement. There are certainly areas where specific men's movements are needed as well, but it is indisputable that there are parts of the world where there are specific women's rights abuses and a specific women's movement is needed. So I'm reluctant to call myself an anti-feminist. I'm not a feminist, but nor do I identify as an anti-feminist. And just for the record, I don't identify myself as an MRA, men's rights activist, or masculist either, although I do believe in men's rights issues. I believe in women's rights issues, but I'm against pigeonholing myself in any of those ways. Hopefully the reasons will become clear when I go forward with this video. Please bear with me. Some of the stuff you will have heard many times before, because it's been very widely covered in cyberspace. Unfortunately, cyberspace seems to be the only media format where dissenting views on feminism can be heard. So that's why you will find a lot of videos critical of feminism on YouTube, because unfortunately the news media, and this is something I'll try and cover in my points, the news media and other media formats will not give a balanced sort of outlook on those who are critical of feminism. They give plenty of platform to feminists, but not those who are critical of it. So I don't believe all feminists are man-haters. I'm not anti-feminist. I believe that some feminist movements are legitimate, and certainly I'm not one of those people that says feminism has never been legitimate. Certainly there's been points in history where it has been. Definitely first wave feminism, and certainly to some extent second wave feminism, not third wave feminism. Although those themselves are abstract terms, but I'm not against all feminism, put it that way. I am very, very critical of contemporary Western feminism. Third point, feminists often counter in response to the misandry claims that there are male feminists. That is true, I know there are. I made a video specifically about male feminists, and those guys have a right to their view. They don't have a right to dictate to other men that they should identify as feminists. So all those things I take on board, and that's something I want to make absolutely clear before I start with the points. And one more very important thing, and this is something that is going to be highlighted hopefully throughout some of the points I'm making anyway, but the idea that you have to call yourself a feminist to believe in equality is utterly absurd. I do regard myself as an egalitarian, I do regard myself as a humanist, a humanitarian, but I don't identify myself as a feminist, and no one will pressure me to do so. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to get into some of the main issues I take with contemporary Western feminism. This is in no particular order, I'm just going to read off, I don't often do this, but I made a list actually to prepare for this video. So, I judge movements by their actions, not rhetoric. That's the first point. Very often feminists will counter to critics that the critics don't understand feminism. That's particularly levelled against groups like Women Against Feminism. I counter that movements should be judged by their actions, not by dictionary definitions. The dictionary definition of communism, or at least the ideological definition of communism, is a relatively nice idea. The means are shared among the masses. Equality. Sounds good, sounds great. But 20th century communism was an absolute nightmare, dominated by brutal dictators like Chairman Mao and Joseph Stalin. Now, this isn't to equate feminism with communism, but it's just to make the point that dictionary definitions are a lot less relevant than a movement's actions. Unfortunately, a large segment of the media continue to pander to the dictionary definitions. I agree, the dictionary definitions do explain feminism as an egalitarian concept, but de facto feminism is anything but. So I disregard that argument entirely, because it's up to feminists to prove their egalitarian credentials by actions, not by spouting out the usual dictionary definitions. Feminism, Western feminism, is intolerant of dissent. Now, what I mean by that is there's a very widespread tendency within the feminist movement, within the Western feminist movement. In fact, at this point, I'll just say it, every time I mention feminism, I'm talking about the Western context, okay? Just to save me having to say that every time. It is very, very intolerant of dissent. Pretty much any feminist group on Facebook will censor and block any dissenting opinions. And I've made a point about the idea of trolling. Just having a different opinion is not the same as trolling. So let's just be clear about that. There's no doubt about it. Many feminists are intolerant of dissent. It's not a case of, oh well, we'll agree to disagree, or I disagree with you but I respect your opinion. When it comes to feminism, there's very, very little freedom of expression, because even in media formats, when you have someone who is disagreeing with a feminist, very often the feminist will shout that person down, especially if they're a man. And because we have a media that does pander to feminism, there's very, very little platform for dissent. So there's no question about it. There's absolutely very little tolerance of dissent within feminism. And for all the talk about feminism being identified by lots of different schools of thought and lots of different movements, which to some extent is true, on the whole, feminism is very intolerant of those who take a different view. If a man questions feminism in any way, then he is shouted down, he is branded a misogynist, and he's branded as sexist. Women who voice different views are seen as basically subservient. The more moderate approach by some feminists is to then get patronising, and they'll say things like, oh sweetie, you're not against feminism, you're a feminist, you just don't know it. Or you don't hate feminism, you don't understand it, things like this. So it's actually a very patronising attitude. It's either completely intolerant or patronising. I've been looking at this subject for years, literally years. I believe I have seen enough opinions, come across enough feminists, been involved in enough discussions to form a view on feminism. So it's not a case that I don't understand it. I have listened, I've heard both sides, and I understand it as much as I want to. So I just don't buy that for a second. Enough of the patronising, and enough of the trying to shout other people down. Just deal with the fact that not everyone is going to agree with you. You have a right to your view, and I'll always defend a feminist's right to his, her, or her opinion. But I ask that they respect my right to an opinion, and that's something that many feminists will not do. My next point. Forcing conformity onto others. This is quite an important issue actually, especially regarding women in feminism. Particularly regarding women in feminism. And this is one of the reasons I believe the group Women Against Feminism was set up. Now in that group, it's a Facebook group and it's absolutely growing in support, which is entirely understandable in my opinion. There's many young women go on and hold up signs saying the reasons that they are against feminism, and there's a wide variety of reasons. But one common theme among it is that they resent feminists trying to pressure them into conformity. You see, for all the talk about feminism being about women's choices and women's rights and women's independence to think for themselves, feminists are actually deeply intolerant of women who don't conform to feminism. What I mean by that is if you take traditional women, for example, women who might want, through their choice, to be, for example, housewives who maybe don't want to take a traditional job and who prefer to take the very important job of being a mother, something I have a huge amount of respect for. Feminists will say they're just being subservient to men, they're slaves to patriarchy, and so on, and they get very patronising. And they actually do try to bully women into conformity. And I've seen some quotations that women on that group have made about feminists who have slandered them in very disgusting ways, very heated ways, very vitriolic ways, simply because they don't call themselves feminists. In one case there was a young woman who stood up for a men's rights activist who happened to be a friend of hers. He was talking about the issue of sexual violence against men. Because she stood up for him, a feminist then violently confronted her. So there's no doubt about it, and this is going back to my last point, but they do cross over a little bit. There's massive intolerance among feminism, within feminism. I mean, look at the incident where the group of feminists tried to shut down the debate at the University of, I believe it was Toronto, a few years ago. Look up the video. They set off a fire alarm to try to close down a men's rights seminar. That just demonstrates that they are utterly intolerant of any other views, or even the idea of men's rights even being heard. And I'll come to that point in a minute. I'll probably have to go into another video here, but that's inevitable. And actually that does bring me to my next point, actively standing in the way of men's issues or ignoring men's issues completely. Now this is something that feminists will deny until they're blue in the face, that, oh, we're not against men's rights. Now, this would come to one of my disclaimers. I don't believe that all feminists are anti-male, and I do believe actually that some feminists probably do believe in men's rights. However, as a movement, feminism not only goes out of its way to try and silence men's issues even being raised, but it will go to the point of denying that. And this relates to one of my other points, which is about the myth of male privilege. Now, what I mean by that is, whenever men's issues are discussed, there will be many feminists who literally laugh, and who literally say, these issues are not important, men already have rights, the patriarchy controls everyone, so what are you men complaining about? Whilst callously disregarding the very important issues that are being raised. I don't have time in this video to raise all those issues. I simply don't have the time. But when those issues are raised, either they are silenced with ridicule, or feminists claim that they don't oppose them, and yet why is it that you actually have examples of feminists trying to deny that these things even exist? And there has been examples of this in the British House of Commons. Whenever male MPs have raised men's issues, the Home Secretary, for example, has basically ridiculed the members into silence. This is what happens. So there is absolutely not a level playing field whatsoever when it comes to the discussion of egalitarian issues. We'll go into another video.